Welcome back, everyone. Last time, we were taking a deep dive into Loren Cunningham's story.
Well, it's a good thing that Loren had just met someone pretty incredible himself.
That's right. He and Darlene got married just a few months after they met. Talk about a whirlwind romance.
A whirlwind and then some, right. And get this, for their honeymoon, they decide to go on a mission trip.
Instead of like a tropical island or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Europe and Asia.
Wow. I mean, that says a lot about their commitment right from the start, doesn't it? So, this honeymoon, it wasn't just a sightseeing tour, right?
Not at all. It's clear from Loren's account that this trip was also about Darlene finding her own place in this shared calling, this mission they felt God had placed on their lives together.
That's a lot of pressure for a newly married couple. I mean, can you imagine being Darlene, trying to figure out your role in this huge world-changing vision alongside this larger-than-life husband?
It couldn't have been easy. In fact, Loren actually talks about how Darlene struggled during that time.
Struggled how?
She struggled to hear God's voice for herself amidst, I don't know, maybe the chaos of their travels or just maybe the weight of Loren's vision.
So she was feeling lost.
In a way, yeah. Like she was trying to find her place in a story that it seems like someone else was already writing.
And that someone else being her husband.
Yeah, exactly. And that feeling of not being good enough, of not having the right skills, it's something I think a lot of people can identify with, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, I know I have. So what was the turning point for Darlene? Was there a specific moment when everything changed for her?
There was this really powerful moment they had when they were in Singapore. They were staying in this really simple guest room, and outside you have all the sounds of the city, and Darlene just breaks down. She's honest with Loren. She tells him that she feels inadequate, like she just didn't have what it took to do ministry.
It must have taken a lot of courage for her to admit that, especially to her husband, who seems so certain about everything.
It really does. But here's the thing. Her answer, it didn't come from some new skill set or anything like that. It came from the Bible, actually, the story about David and Abigail.
Okay, remind me about that story.
Right, so Abigail, she's this incredibly wise and humble woman, and she goes to meet David, who, at this point, is a powerful leader.
Okay, I remember.
And what's interesting is that she focuses on this really simple act of service. She washes the feet of David's servants.
Foot washing. It's not exactly the most glamorous job.
Exactly, but that's the point. It's this powerful reminder that true leadership, it's often not about, having all the answers or being in the spotlight.
It's about service. It's about humility.
Right, putting others first.
Right. And I think that's something we can easily forget in our culture today, right?
Yeah.
We're so focused on achievement, on being the best, on, I don't know, maybe even just being seen.
Yeah.
That we forget the power of those small, simple acts of service.
Yeah, and those small acts, they might not seem like much on the surface, but they can make a world of difference.
So true. So Darlene, she has this realization that her ministry, it's not about having it all figured out. It's about serving, about being willing to get her hands dirty, to put others first, even if it means taking on a role that might seem insignificant.
It's about empowering others. It's about creating space for them to thrive.
That's beautiful. And, it's funny because what seemed like this moment of weakness for Darlene, this moment of doubt, it actually became this foundational principle for YWAM moving forward.
It did. Servanthood, it's woven into the fabric of YWAM's DNA, and it all goes back to Darlene's realization during that trip to Singapore.
So they return from their honeymoon, they're newly married, they have this renewed sense of purpose. What's next?
Well, at this point, YWAM, it still doesn't really exist, right? It's still mostly just this vision. No staff, no funding, no real structure. So their first step, it's a big one, and they decide to go to the Bahamas.
The Bahamas.
That's where they decide to launch their first official YWAM outreach.
The Bahamas.
Yeah.
Okay, so what was it about the Bahamas that appealed to them?
So, Loren, he called it a summer of service. It would be this 2-month outreach program. Young people, they could go and, put their faith into action,
So this is like the first summer of service, the very first one.
Exactly.
And their goal was to take this program to the Bahamas.
To the Bahamas. And get this, he wanted to recruit over 100 volunteers to join them.
100 volunteers. That's a lot of people, especially
Yeah.
for an organization that, let's face it, barely even existed at that point, right?
Auspicious, for sure.
To say the least. So how do you even begin to recruit 100 people to go to the Bahamas with no money and no real organization to back you up?
It was a lot of word of mouth, Loren and Darlene, they would travel around.
They hit the road?
They hit the road hard, speaking in churches, youth groups, anywhere they could find an audience, basically.
Sharing this vision, this dream.
And imagine their pitch is essentially, hey, Are you willing to give up your summer, pay your own way, and come do hard work in the hot Caribbean sun?
And no dating. Don't forget about the no dating rule.
Yeah. Oh, right. Almost forgot about that little detail. Oh, and by the way, you're not allowed to date while you're there. I mean, talk about a tough sell, right?
Yeah, I mean, even for someone who's really passionate about their faith, that's a big ask. So what was the appeal? Why do you think so many young people said yes to that?
Well, you got to remember, there's something really powerful, really attractive about that kind of radical commitment, especially when you're young and you want to make a difference in the world, to be a part of something bigger than yourself.
So that sense of adventure, of purpose,
Mhm.
and in this case, of really putting your faith on the line.
Absolutely. And it worked. They actually ended up with 146 young people who said yes to the challenge.
146. Okay, so they found their volunteers. What do they do next?
They bought some school buses.
School buses.
School buses. They sold their Volkswagen Beetle and bought a fleet of old school buses to transport everyone. Can you imagine that?
Wow, that's incredible. So they pack all these kids in these school buses and they head down to the Bahamas.
Pretty much. It was this incredible leap of faith, right? They had no idea what to expect.
They get to the Bahamas.
Yeah.
25 teams spread out across the islands, living in pretty basic conditions, I imagine,
Yeah.
and sharing the gospel with anyone who would listen.
Yeah, they faced a lot of challenges, language barriers, cultural differences, and of course they had to rely on their faith for everything, for food, for shelter, for guidance. It wasn't always easy, that's for sure.
It sounds like the kind of experience that really shapes you, challenges you, pushes you to grow.
Oh, absolutely. And Loren, in his book, he tells all these incredible stories from that summer.
What kind of stories?
Well, there was this one story about a bartender who, after hearing the gospel message from one of the teams, he decided to follow Christ. He even put his bar up for sale.
Wow.
And then there was this woman who had been almost completely blind, and after the students prayed for her, she regained her sight.
That's incredible. It's like you hear stories like that, and it's easy to just dismiss them as, feel-good anecdotes.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's something more to it than that.
Right. There's this power in those stories. They remind us that sometimes the most incredible things happen when we step outside of our comfort zones, when we take a risk and say yes to something bigger than ourselves.
And it sounds like that's exactly what happened in the Bahamas, not just for the people they were ministering to, but for the volunteers themselves.
Absolutely. They went there thinking they were going to change the world, but they came back, changed themselves. Humbler, more compassionate, their faith deepened by everything they'd experienced.
So it wasn't just about converting people to Christianity, it was about something more.
Yeah, it was about cultivating a new generation of leaders, young people who were willing to step out in faith, to embrace the unknown, and to serve others. It was about laying the groundwork for what YWAM would become. And then, right in the middle of all of this, Hurricane Cleo hit.
Oh, man, the hurricane. Did you mention that last time?
Oh, sure.
The one that ripped through the Caribbean.
That's the one. And Loren and Darlene, they were right in the thick of it.
You were in the Bahamas when the hurricane hit.
They were. Can you imagine the weight of that responsibility? Being in a foreign country, responsible for over 100 young people, and a massive hurricane is headed straight for you.
I can't even imagine. I mean, what did they do? How do you even prepare for something like that?
They managed to evacuate everyone to this really sturdy church building right before the storm hit. And they rode out the hurricane huddled together, listening to the wind and the rain beating down on the building.
It must have been terrifying. Talk about a test of faith, right?
It was intense, to say the least. And it's amazing. Loren talks about how that experience, even though it was terrifying, it actually shifted his perspective on, the whole purpose of ministry.
Really? How so?
Well, it was the hurricane, as destructive as it was, it revealed something important to him about the nature of sharing the gospel.
It wasn't enough to just preach it.
Exactly. He realized that you can't separate the message of the gospel from actually meeting people's practical needs.
It's one thing to talk the talk, but you also got to walk the walk.
Yeah, exactly. You can't just tell people about God's love. You have to show them. You have to back it up with action, with compassion, with tangible help.
It's like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Exactly. And that really hit home for Loren after the hurricane. He saw the devastation firsthand.
What was the damage like?
It was bad. Cleo, it claimed the lives of 138 people.
Oh, wow. It's heartbreaking.
It was a tragedy, and thousands of people were left homeless. Loren talks about walking through the wreckage after the storm, seeing homes reduced to rubble, and he was just overwhelmed by this sense of responsibility, this desire to do more, to help them rebuild, to provide aid.
So this is where the seed for the ship is planted.
You got it. It was like this impossible dream at first, this idea that they could have this vessel,
A ship.
a ship that could transport volunteers, supplies, all of that to crisis zones around the world. Like this floating hub for missions work. That's how it all started. Just this tiny seed of an idea in the aftermath of this devastating hurricane.
So they go through this intense experience with the hurricane, head back to the U.S., and what happens next?
Well, remember, Loren was still ordained with the Assemblies of God.
Right, and he was hoping they would support YWAM.
Exactly. So he goes to meet with the general superintendent, a guy named Thomas Zimmerman.
How'd that go?
Well, let's just say it didn't go as planned. Zimmerman, he had some concerns. He recognized that the summer of service had been impactful, but he was worried about YWAM operating outside of the established denominational structure. He saw Loren as this young, enthusiastic leader who was maybe a little too eager to break the mold.
They didn't like that he was doing his own thing.
Pretty much. So Zimmerman, he offers Loren a job.
A job?
A job at the Assemblies of God headquarters in Springfield, Missouri. It was a good job, stable, good salary. He would have had the opportunity to continue working with young people, but it would have meant giving up YWAM.
Wow, that's a tough one. Security versus calling.
Exactly. What would you do in that situation? On the one hand, you have this safe, secure path laid out before you. On the other hand, you have this dream, this calling, but it comes with zero guarantees.
So what did Loren do?
He took a leap of faith. He declined the job offer.
He chose YWAM.
He did. He chose to follow his heart, even though it meant stepping away from the support of the Assemblies of God, from that stability, and venturing into the unknown. It was a risky move, for sure.
I bet. So how did that go over? What was the fallout like?
It was tough. Word got around, and Loren and Darlene faced a lot of criticism, even accusations from some within the church.
Wow, that's rough. So much for Christian support.
Right? And it wasn't just that. Family relationships became strained. They were facing financial uncertainty. It was a real test of their commitment to the vision they felt God had given them.
So what got them through?
Well, in the middle of all of this, Loren's Aunt Sandra, the one who had always opposed his calling, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer.
Oh, wow. That's awful.
It was. And it would have been so easy for Loren to be angry, to say, "I told you so," but he didn't. He chose compassion. He went to go see her, shared his heart for YWAM with her, and before she passed away, she asked him to lead her in a prayer of salvation.
Wow, that's powerful. A reminder that it's never too late.
Exactly. And it says so much about Loren's character, his ability to forgive, to offer grace, even when he was hurting himself.
So there they are. They faced opposition, financial struggles, the loss of a family member. It makes you wonder, what could possibly happen next?
Well, they decide to go to New Zealand.
New Zealand. Why New Zealand?
It wasn't strategic or anything, more like a divine detour, an opportunity to connect with other believers. They had no idea how significant that trip would become for the future of YWAM.
Okay, now you have to tell us more.
You'll have to wait for our next deep dive to hear about that adventure. But let's just say Loren's faith and his understanding of God, well, they were about to be stretched in ways he never imagined.
I can't wait to hear about it. To our listeners, thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into the heart of YWAM. It's a story that reminds us to embrace those big dreams, those callings on our hearts, even when the path ahead seems unclear, because you never know where they might lead.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep seeking, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.